It's great to be here with you all. My name is Bryce Pippert, and I'm a principal with Booz Allen Hamilton, focused on digital data and analytics solutions for our federal clients. I'm very pleased to be introducing and moderating this panel on the future of open data in the executive branch. We heard a little bit earlier from Darrell Issa that if laws are not implemented and enforced, they are meaningless, and that implementation often requires very hard work. The Data Act requires the publishing of detailed spending information in the federal government for all the spending life cycle, from appropriations, budget, through obligations and line item payments. That's equivalent to representing 20% of our gross domestic product with one set of views where we can navigate from the highest level of the economy to the lowest level. That perspective on our federal government spending is going to be very powerful and transformational to how we think about allocation of resources and managing our government. But Data Act implementation is not the only open data initiative at work in our government today. Our government is publishing tens of thousands of new data sets within the past couple of years, and our panelists today are helping lead the executive branch in our open data initiatives to transform our government and unlock value for our society. At Booz Allen, we're helping clients excel in our connected and digital world. We're helping clients to orient their .gov sites to be citizen service oriented, and we're delivering strategies and capabilities to unlock the value of data sets currently held within organizations. We see a future of continued public and private partnership to unlock value creation and get more effective and efficient allocation of resources for our organizations and across our economy through better open data exchange. Over the past couple of years and today, our executive branch is focused on open data and digital transformation initiatives. We have a policy today where data is open by default, and this has been a big change for us. We've shifted from closed environments where we hold on to our information to now exposing it as our default mode of operating. But the policy and strategy shifts only have their intended outcomes when they're coupled with good execution and implementation and a focus on the usage of data and value creation. Today's panelists have great perspectives on what's happening in the executive branch to implement these policy changes and execute them. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our panelists. First, Cory Zarik is a senior advisor for open government at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She's responsible for designing and implementing U.S. policy on open government issues, and she's coordinating domestic efforts with the Global Open Government Partnership of a 60-country coalition that promotes collaboration, participatory, and transparent government, working with all of our federal government agencies to develop and implement open government initiatives. Prior to this, she was the attorney advisor for the Office of Government Information Services, where she served as the Freedom of Information Act ombudsman, responsible for assisting requesters and agencies with resolving disputes and reviewing agency FOIA compliance. Next, we've got Vicki McFadden, and she's the Deputy Chief Customer Officer at the General Services Administration. She helps the agency to make data-driven decisions on people, processes, technology, and policies to improve the customer and citizen experience with our government. Prior to this role, she served as the Senior Advisor to the GSA Administrator, where she developed the acquisition and performance management strategies for the agency. And before that, she was a financial management analyst in the GSA Office of Travel, Motor Vehicle, and Card Services. And finally, Dave Lieberich is with us. He's the Fiscal Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury, where he's responsible for developing policy and overseeing the operations of the financial infrastructure of our federal government in the areas of payments, collections, debt financing, accounting, debt delinquent collection, and shared services. He served as the first commissioner of the Bureau of Fiscal Service, which was established with the consolidation of the Bureau of Public Debt and the Financial Management Service. Prior to his service at FMS, Mr. Lieberich was at the U.S. Mint, and he served in the capacity of Deputy Director and Acting Director, where he was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the world's largest manufacturer of coins. We've got a panel that has great perspectives on things happening across the government to open our data sets, make them available for public use, and unlock value for our society. I'm pleased to introduce them, and please join me in welcoming them. First up, we're going to hear from Karina from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me here, and thanks to the Data Transparency Coalition for putting on a great event. There's an amazing lineup today, and I'm really excited to be part of it. So let's start with a little background. You'll hear in more detail from some of my colleagues about some specifics of what's going on in data transparency and with the Data Act, but let's start with the big picture. So as you heard, I work on the administration's open government portfolio. In 2009, on President Obama's very first day in office, he issued a few memos, actually, that pertain to open government, and one of them specifically we refer to as the Open Government Memo, directed our executive branch agencies to be more open, participatory, transparent, and collaborative in the work that we do. It directed agencies to prioritize open government for the first time. Now, of course, open government is nothing new. We've been working in this space for decades. The Freedom of Information Act will turn 50 next year. It's probably our original open government law. But really capturing open government in a collective, thoughtful way for inviting all of us to work together to push this effort forward is something that was a little bit new and has been a big part of this administration's work. So the Open Government Directive followed the Open Government Memo. It came out in December of 2009 and really spelled out what the administration meant by being more open and participatory and collaborative. The Open Government Directive was also the beginning of our work in open data. Part of that directive asked agencies to begin identifying data sets that were seen as valuable that they could begin releasing to the public. And back then I was at the National Archives, and I remember we got that directive and we're all a little bit puzzled about what a high value data set is. And it's been really exciting to see that work grow, and now I checked data.gov yesterday, there are more than 160,000 open government data sets active and live on data.gov. A huge thank you to that team. I think I saw some of them in the room. GSA manages data.gov, so you may hear more about that in a minute as well. So the open government work also involves our efforts, not just domestically, but around the globe. And in 2011, President Obama and 7 other heads of state launched the Open Government Partnership, which is a global collective of countries and civil societies working together to push more open and accountable governments. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. Are we on the right slide? Yes. We also have a whole slew of open data initiatives. I'll talk about a few of those this morning as well. But since 2011, when we really began focusing on these open data efforts, we've been working to expand this work across all sectors: health, education, energy, finance, others. And we've really prioritized identifying data sets for release, more than just those 3 initial high-value data sets. And government agencies, as you heard, have released them by the dozens. Following on that and really capitalizing on the great work happening in open data, in 2013, President Obama issued an Open Data Executive Order. And this EO declared that open and machine readable is the new default for government information. And that has been a very new way for a lot of us to work, a lot of us who've come up in government for some time, working in very paper-based environments. So to have this open data EO and then the open data policy that followed it has really helped us move forward in managing our information as data assets. So let's take a second and talk about the Open Government Partnership. I mentioned that this was founded in 2011 by President Obama and 7 other heads of state. The The great thing about the Open Government Partnership is that it's not a partnership of these member countries. It's a partnership between the governments of these countries and their civil societies. So what started with 8 countries and about a dozen civil society organizations in 2011, now 4 years later is at 66 countries and hundreds of civil society organizations. The OGP, you know we like acronyms, the OGP has together created a couple thousand new open government commitments around the world, pushing governments to be more open and transparent, to curb corruption, to increase accountability, and to be just better governance structures. So this partnership has been a great platform for advancing all of the open government work we've been doing anyway in the United States, including the open data efforts. So countries that are members of the Open Government Partnership publish national action plans every 2 years that detail very specifically commitments that the countries will take, again, in partnership with civil society, to be more open and transparent. And those commitments cross all sectors. We've got commitments related to transparency of agriculture data, certainly commitments in the financial transparency space, and in the last National Action Plan that was published in 2013, it was just a little bit too soon for the Data Act efforts. We did have some fiscal transparency commitments, but we ended up doing an update to that plan and included specifically in it some commitments related to carrying out the mandates of the Data Act. And so, and again, we'll hear more about that in just a few minutes, but capturing all of that in our open government plans is incredibly helpful because it allows us to track the work we're doing in a centralized place, and it allows us to advance it and enhance it onto the world stage so that we can be global leaders in what we're up to and share that with other countries. The Open Government Partnership really does have a strong focus on open data, as you can see from the image on the slide. So many commitments that other countries that our own plan and other countries' plans have included are in the open data space. It's really just the way that we work now. The Open Government Partnership also has an open data working group, and that brings together members of the open data community from all over the world to collaborate and share practices on the work that they're doing. I know that some of our GSA colleagues actually represent the United States on the Open Data Working Group for the Open Government Partnership. The OGP has a big summit each year where countries all come from all over the world and deliver any national action plans that are due to be presented and meet on important topics. That summit is coming up at the end of October, and so we have a giant delegation from the United States, both government and civil society, planning to go. If you're interested, you're all invited, and certainly lots of topics that are important to us will be discussed. So back to open data in the United States. I mentioned that in 2013, President Obama issued an Open Data EO, executive order, making open and machine readable the new default for government information. Accompanying that was the Open Data Policy, which we affectionately refer to as M1313 for you government nerds in the room, and that really directs agencies to begin managing information as an asset. And of course that doesn't happen overnight, right? For the last 2 years, we have been working really hard with our agencies to move toward managing information as an asset. So I mentioned data.gov. There's a screen capture there of the data.gov homepage. Again, 160,000 data sets cutting across all sectors. The data.gov site has incredible resources and is fantastic if you haven't spent much time there. Another effort that the administration launched into, I think about a year ago, May of 2014, was publishing an open data action plan. So we have an open government action plan, and all the federal agencies actually have their own open government action plans. And so the United States published an open data action plan as part of our work that we're doing globally in open data. So that's been an interesting document to try and deliver against as well. Another thing I'll mention is Project Open Data, which is a site that the White House created to aid agencies, and really anyone, it's open, into managing their data and providing resources and assistance and shared best practices to assist with that. So let me give a few examples of how the United States is driving open data and actually how we link that back to our work with the Open Government Partnership and our national action plans. One topic, I chose topics that relate to the financial transparency space, or tried to at least, but they may not be on everyone's radar. So this first one is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Extractive industries is essentially where we're tracking the revenues received for the natural resources that come from U.S. lands, so oil and gas and timber and everything else. And this site, the EITI site, the link's there on the slide, was first of all beautifully created by our colleagues at 18F, which is part of GSA. Thank you. And done in great partnership with the Department of Interior, which is really the subject matter owner of this space. Interior was very eager to join the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, but we didn't quite meet all the criteria out of the gates, and they've been working to get us there, and now we're on track to be a valid member country, which is fantastic. One of the key criteria, though, was to capture our data about this work and to be able to provide that data to the public. And so through the open data work that we've been doing and prioritizing in the US, we've been able to not only open up that data and make it available, but to put it on this beautiful site that can help anyone visualize and use that data, download that data, take it with them and manipulate it on their own, but to really see what's happening in this line of work. Another great example is foreignassistance.gov. The United States, of course, has an ambitious foreign assistance agenda, involves lots and lots of money, and there are a lot of interested people who want to track where those funds go, how they're spent, et cetera. And so, again, our friends at GSA have been incredibly helpful, working with the State Department on the foreignassistance.gov site and many other agencies that report this kind of data to find the data, to clean the data. Sometimes that's the most difficult and least fun part of all of this, but cleaning the data to be sure it's accurate and usable, and to make that data available, and again, available to be visualized, used, and downloaded and kind of taken with you in your own way through this foreignassistance.gov site. So that site just relaunched in recent months, and it's another beautiful example of ways we can open up data and also make it easy for just about anyone to figure it out and use it. So next up on the agenda for new websites or refreshed websites to make more data available, to make better data available, and to provide it in a beautiful, user-friendly way is, of course, usaspending.gov. And I know my colleague Dave will talk more about that and the improvements that are coming with usaspending.gov. So I'll talk about it actually from the process perspective that I've gotten to see as wearing my Open Government Initiative hat. I thought the process that the USA Spending team out of Treasury and supported, of course, by colleagues throughout the interagency has been amazing. It's been an incredibly open and participatory process. That's something we don't often see in government policy making and would love to see more of. It's been fantastic that as that team has been trying to build improvements into the site, they have at every step along the way sought feedback from colleagues throughout the interagency, from civil society, those key stakeholders that we would be remiss to leave out of these conversations. And I think it's been incredibly useful as an example for all of us working even in other sectors and spaces to see how successful this engagement has been and how open this process has been, leading to where we are headed next. So I will stop there, and we'll look forward to hearing where we are headed next from my colleagues at the table. Thanks.
Hi everyone, Vicki McFadden here. I'm with the GSA Chief Customer Officer team, and here to speak a little bit about how GSA is helping agencies get started when it comes to data. I've been with GSA for a long time, about 9 years, and it always surprises me that we're kind of this unknown organization that operates a little bit behind the scenes, but we have a really kind of sexy mission where we try things first for government and then help other agencies get started and leverage a lot of our lessons learned. So the nice thing about GSA is there can be these EEOs and executive orders that come out of the White House. GSA is ready to catch them and then test them and pilot them in interesting ways and then help other agencies get started. So in this last administration, there's been a lot of focus around cloud and open data and citizen experience, and GSA is a great place for those projects to get started. and then we can leverage the work we're doing for other agencies. So I wanted to pick up the conversation a little bit about some of the specific work that's been happening, and then explain a few pilots that have been launched recently that we're excited about and that hold promise for the future. So around, particularly open data, GSA does manage the data.gov platform, which has been around for quite some time, and again has hundreds of thousands of data sets on there that are really kind of exciting because they're spurring entrepreneurship. Private companies can go on there and create new businesses off of this now open government data. They're helping consumers make better decisions. The CFPB actually releases all of the consumer complaints on their banks. Every single comment that's ever come in is now open to the public, so you can make better decisions about your banking experience. Even airlines, the airlines that are on time or not on time, that's all available on data.gov. So it's a great platform for, again, entrepreneurship, scientific discovery, participatory government with citizens. So it's a great platform that GSA manages on behalf of the other government. In terms of what's coming up next is the platform still, as you guys are all aware, data quality continues to be an issue across some of these data sets. So GSA is really focused on ways that we can clean up these data sets, standardize some of the fields to make it more easily navigable by citizens and easier for them to access in usable ways. We've also recently added API technology, so it's a little bit easier to interact with that website now. Another big focus around GSA has been around improving the citizen experience on their interactions with government. It's been a big push for my team specifically in the Chief Customer Office. We were the first Chief Customer Office in government, and we're really trying to, we've been around for about a year, and we're really trying to find ways that we can collect voice of the citizen data and then use that information in meaningful ways to improve the delivery to citizens on their interactions with government. We have a small team, but we're pushing hard on a few areas, and we're excited to announce a couple of pilots that have come out earlier this summer. One is called Feedback USA. We went to a listening tour across agencies, and we heard that they have pretty good information on their interactions with citizens through contact centers and with their web transactions. But when it came to in-person physical experiences with agencies, it was basically a black hole where they didn't have data on citizen experience. So we launched a pilot recently with a few agencies, and it's going to be a physical kiosk where you, as you go through your TSA airport security experience, or you go to the State Department to get a new passport, you'll be able to just touch a happy face button and give real-time data on your experience. It's been really exciting so far. We've only had it open for 2 or 3 weeks, but we're getting thousands of data points a day, and we're starting to see some really meaningful trends, especially with places like SSA. They're seeing that Mondays at noon are crazy, the satisfaction plummets, and so there's really simple things that they can do, kind of like the DMV. Just put a note on your websites that you should expect higher than normal traffic levels, and you'll expect some wait time if you go to an SSA office on Monday at noon. So we're really trying to get the citizen data collected in meaningful ways and then bring it back to agencies so that they can improve their citizen services. So that's a new pilot. It's focusing on in-person transactions now. We would love to open it up to the public and share this data publicly in future iterations of the pilot. We're also looking at ways to get standardized transactional level data from the website. So if you go on there to complete a college application form or anything like that, we'd be able to get citizen transactional level data there too, which is exciting for us. Another pilot that recently launched is around Yelp for government. Another thing that GSA does that's a little bit behind the scenes is we actually negotiate all of the terms of services for social media to allow other agencies to use social media platforms to interact with the public, so Twitter, Facebook, et cetera. We just negotiated Yelp, which is exciting because there's a lot of Yelp pages already established for agencies, but the agencies had no way of actually logging on, claiming those sites as real websites, and then using those platforms to interact with citizens. So now they have the ability to do that if they have the capacity and bandwidth, bandwidth to actually use the platforms themselves. But GSA on our courthouses is going to be launching a pilot to open up all of our courthouse websites, allow citizens who attend or go to our courthouses to give us feedback on the building, their experience there, and then use that data in real time. The nice thing is there's all these platforms that lay on top of Yelp, so property managers can get text messages when someone leaves a comment, and then they can respond in real time. So that's another kind of exciting pilot to show how the government can interact with citizens in real time. Which is fun because we're used to these annual static standard surveys that take a long time, and it's way more exciting to get data in real time and use that. And then, of course, another citizen-facing platform that we offer to other agencies for free is the Digital Analytics Program. It's, you can go to analytics.usa.gov, and it's basically Google free software that we can install on every government website so that agencies can see the traffic to their site, who's coming, the browsers that are coming, how long people are staying, where they're coming from, and it allows agencies to improve the search and ability to navigate their websites through this platform. So the last area that I really wanted to talk about is another kind of exciting startup within GSA. Again, us testing things first for government, learning some lessons along the way, and then rolling it out. It's the 18F program, which is a digital startup at GSA. It's been around for a little over a year. And basically their mission is to help agencies design software in a smarter way. Again, been around government for a long time, and we typically set up these really long contracts and wait 5 or 6 years before we see a beta of a product, and then we can make adjustments to it. And at that point, it's no longer relevant. And so 18F's mission is really to go in and design websites, as you saw, in a really agile, human-centered design way. And they're helping agencies get started. So we're also kind of thinking of it as a hub and spoke model, where the hub is at GSA. We can come up with playbooks, we can negotiate terms for common tools that developers need in government, and then we can encourage other agencies to create their own digital service teams that kind of relate back to the 18F hub that also partners with the White House quite closely, the USDS team. So digital teams are popping up at the VA and other agencies to help kind of further this mission, which is really exciting. One of the projects for 18F that recently just rolled out is something called the College Scorecard. And this is a great example of how 18F has been able to help an agency unleash their data. They went with Treasury and Department of Education and basically were able to comb through 18 years of data across 8,000 different schools, universities, and then surface all of that data in a meaningful way so that people who are applying to colleges can make better decisions about the university that they're thinking about going to. It shows things like percentage of people who graduate, starting salary, all of that. So it's a really kind of exciting use case of the way that we can take these smart digital service teams who can work across the White House, the USDS team, GSA, and then agencies to really unleash their data in meaningful ways. So that's a couple examples of how GSA is helping move the needle. Love to have some questions later in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank Hudson and the Data Transparency Coalition for sponsoring this and for having us here. These are really important discussions, and we're really pleased to be part of it. I want to do a couple things. One is I want to just give a quick little background on the Data Act. The second would be to talk a little bit about our approach to implementation, provide you a few accomplishments, and then close with an invitation. The Data Act, as many of you know, it passed in May of 2014, and I would say that I can't say that everyone was wildly enthusiastic about the passage of the Act. This is a pretty significant effort to try to really, move the federal government to increase transparency. Dave Mader and I, who have been leading the effort, Dave Mader from OMB and me from the Treasury side, have been, I think, enormously impressed with how much progress we've made in the last year, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those accomplishments in a second. I think some of the key things that we've been able to do is really convince the federal community that there are really a number of use cases and really good reasons why the federal government needs to be more open and transparent in the federal spending area. I know in the previous discussion there was, questions about, well, how can you get access to data and the like. And I think one of the challenges that you find in government is that data is siloed in so many different systems. And yeah, we can be sitting next to each other, but Vicki may have access to a system which I don't. We're both in the same organization, and we would be much better if both of us had access to the same information to make decisions. And so we've talked about the use of the Data Act as, better data, better decisions, better government, and I think there's a fair amount of truth to that. It is the reason why the federal government needs to be moving forward to better understand how we're spending the taxpayers' dollars. At the same time, the public has a right and to know more about what we're doing, and that goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson talking about, the average person should be able to understand the finances of the United States government, to be able to understand where the spending is occurring, to look for fraud and abuse. The IG community has that same interest. The Congress has the same interest with respect to oversight. And all those are really important things. But those are things that often may not motivate in and of themselves, and I think that's why it's been so important to talk to the federal community, and I think we've been very successful at that, about why it's really important to be moving forward. So to date, let me talk to you about the accomplishments. We issued 57 data standards, and this is important for a number of reasons. And this will be one of the themes throughout my discussion, is that in the past, when the government looks at a big initiative like this, we tend to want to build things. And we tend to want to build big systems and make people do things, and then we spend a lot of time, and we do a very iterative process, very sort of waterfall process along the way. When we've looked at this effort, we tried to look at it differently. We tried to look at it as a data-centric effort, which is the data exists already within the agencies, and so our job is not necessarily to change that data, but it's to unlock it and to capture it. So rather than building a new system, we've talked about tagging the data, looking across the various systems within government, finding where the data exists, extracting it, and then presenting it in a way that the public can use and decision makers can use. It's a very different approach. It's also a much less expensive approach. And so when you have this iterative, agile process where you're constantly doing things quickly, and rather than kind of the traditional waterfall approach, you fail fast, is often what times folks will talk about, and you learn quickly about how things are going. We've had a number of pilots that are underway right now, and I would say that we are very pleased with the initial results on those pilots, with our ability to actually take this concept and execute it. And actually show that you can extract data from the systems where they reside and then present it in a meaningful way. And there's lots of you in the audience who are eager to help us with that presentation process. And I think this is something that came up in one of the earlier panels, is, if the data is there, people will figure out ways to make it more usable to the public at large. And we're already seeing that, and we're seeing that in tools that are very inexpensive. To actually do that, and I think that's also very encouraging. So data-centric, not a system-centric approach, agency-focused. We wanted to make sure that the agencies own the data, that they have an interest in making sure that data quality is good, and that they can actually then use the data. One of the lessons that we learned with respect to taking over USA Spending about a year ago was that it turns out that agencies themselves are using USA Spending to get access to their own data. They can't get access to their own data because they're not configured in a way that allows them to actually access those systems. So the Data Act and our implementation process is really about taking that data from the disparate systems and making it more accessible in a centralized way. And that's, I think, been going very well. Treasury, which has put together a program management office, which I think is one of the best practices you can do in something like this. A very small group of people who are thinking about how we can implement the Data Act when they get up in the morning and go to sleep at night. They went and they said, well, let's take a look at these 57 standards and see where that data currently resides and which systems it resides in sort of a prototypical agency. And turned around and then gave that sort of roadmap, blueprint to every agency and said, we want you to figure out how you sort of line up relative to this prototype. And it turns out that most agencies line up pretty well with that prototype. that then allows you to start to ask the question about, what is the authoritative source of that data? If it resides in 3 systems, what's the best system to extract it from? And as a result, we're now moving much further along with respect to sort of saying, we think the best place for that data is here, the best place to extract it, the best place to actually get it is the best source of truth on something. So the other thing the Program Management Office was very important was to put together an 8-state implementation plan. I know this question came up earlier about would agencies know what they're doing, how they're doing it? Well, the answer is yeah, they do. We've sat down and we've said, here's an 8-step plan. You need to put together a small team. You need to sort of figure out where these standards reside in your organization. You need to kind of review those standards. You need to think about what a broker will look like. And that broker is then taking the data and putting it in a standard schema so it can be presented to the public at large. Treasury now is responsible for, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, of what is that presentation going to look like? And that's where the invitation will come into you. I would point out to my 2 colleagues with me here today is both these organizations have had a disproportionate impact relative to size and what they're doing with respect to government. I mean, discussion a second ago about how important it is to have citizen-centric and user involvement in things really is kind of fundamental to our ability to restore faith and trust in the federal government. That ability for the citizen to actually access information easily and to understand what the government's trying to do is incredibly important. I'm not so sure the public sees the work that these 2 organizations are doing in a very visible way, but I assure you that in the next 5 or 10 years that their impact is going to be enormous. I know it's already impacting my organization about how I look at the services that we provide. And so as we go out and develop new things, my generation was much more about how I had to adapt to technology. If someone built it, I had to come and I would figure out how to use it. That's very clearly not the way the world's working now, which is that the technology needs to adapt to the user. And the only way you can do that is if you're out talking to people and you're inviting them into a discussion and you're asking them, you're putting beta sites out there and you're saying, come here, look at this, tell us if we can do this better. And that's so very important. And both these organizations have been at the heart of that, of really trying to drive that thinking throughout government. And government's big. It takes time. You have to see results. But I think that as we're looking forward to the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see the impact of that across government in a very positive way. I know they always give me slides, and I never follow them, by the way. So here we go. Well, I will try to move through these very quickly. They can never script me well. But I'll get to the invitation because I know we're running up close to the end here. Okay. This was talking about the old way of reaching out and the new way. Let's see. If I went to the right place here. No, I went too far. Let's go back. Okay. What Treasury is going to be putting forward shortly is this is the invitation piece. We are interested in what the next generation of USA spending will look like, and what we're doing is offering an invitation to you to join us in that. And we don't have to have this in place until May of 2017, I believe, but we think it's not too soon to start. And so what we're really doing is saying, as we're putting this site together, we want to know what the users want. And so we've put together a number of sort of mechanisms to do that, about how you as people interested in how government spends money can participate. And so first of all, I would just mention that this is kind of the invitation at the front here, and the second slide here is, I hope, but I can't see it very well, is sort of an example of sort of the ability for the community to provide input. And we want people to sort of be in here on a regular basis. We've done this in a number of other areas. The GitHub has been an example of one way to do that. This is another way of people to kind of come in and say, look, here's different functionality. I want to come and I want to be involved in the discussion, involved in the development. The next slide, I think, is an example of some of the data that we've taken from USA spending today, and many of you have already spoken and know that there's limitations to that data. So we want you to comment on the visualization tools. How are we presenting information? Is it useful? I think the next slide kind of gives you a sense of some of the power that's there. And that is, this is an example of looking at various levels where you see at the highest level there are grants grants to the Department of Transportation, grants in the Federal Highway Administration, and then money being spent on highway planning. And as we move down, as time goes on, you're going to get more levels of granularity all the way down to individual contracts and individual spending as we go through. And I think that's a very important aspect of understanding and seeing information. It should help allow us not only to drill down sort of in a vertical way, but also ultimately allow us to look horizontally across government and see how spending is occurring across agencies and different program areas. We still have work to do on the data standards. You know, I don't want to say that they're complete and done. Place of performance is a difficult issue. It means two different things in two different communities. Program means lots of different things in different communities, and so we're going to need to kind of really continue to work on those things, and we're committed to doing that. I do feel very good about sort of the people we have involved. Once again, it's a fairly small number of people. I feel very good about the level of engagement we have from our agencies. We've been tracking about how they're doing on that 8-step implementation plan I talked about, and they're doing very well. They put these small teams together to looking at the standards, they're understanding the concepts. We have, as I mentioned, we have a couple pilots that are showing great promise, reusable code and those kinds of things that are moving along. So I think if we may not have all the answers today, I'm feeling pretty good about we have a structure, a governance process, and the right people in place to answer really the tough questions. I don't know whether I've actually exhausted all our time from now. I'm sure we're getting close.
Great, thank you. So now we'll open it up for questions. Maybe I'll kick things off with one, and then we'll take some from the audience. We spent a lot of time talking about all the great work that is happening to reorient toward the citizen in terms of our digital channels. I'm wondering, are you guys seeing any examples of how internal government management is changing or will change because of access to new data sets or data sets being exposed to the public that weren't previously exposed to the public? Do you have any good examples that you can share with the group?
So let me give a quick answer to that, and I'll turn it over to others. One is I would say that we'll come back to about this approach and our ability to kind of really look at what the users want. That is having an impact. And so as I mentioned, when I'm looking at all systems development in the Bureau of Fiscal Service right now, we are now talking about everything about how you get the user engaged and how you put that together. The second piece, which is there are a number of very specific examples, but I would also say something that came in the last panel. I'm not sure I need to know that answer right now. The issue is people will figure out how to use the data. You know, you put it out there, and there are going to be things that emerge that you didn't think were going to emerge. I know when I mentioned in the pilot earlier, we had a CFO come in and say, it is remarkable about how much more insight I have into my organization based on this pilot that I have than I had before. I now know where my money is being spent and who's getting what in a way I never had before. So I know that there are very specific examples that are out there, and there are going to be more to come. I can talk about GPS, you know, how that's used, how NOAA information is used. There are a number of areas where having access to data has resulted in real material difference being made in society and within government.
I think an interesting example that GSA is really trying to help, again, we're the procurement and the real estate arm for the government. I think we're actually the second largest landowner behind the Pope. So fun fact about GSA there, you know, timely. And so one interesting thing that we're trying to do is take all of the agency's purchasing data that we have access to. I mean, we also manage the government's purchase cards, so we have lots of access to rich data there. We're trying to get into level 3 data where we can, but we're starting to post our prices paid information on the acquisition gateway so that contracting officers and contracting officers representatives across government can log in with their, it's unfortunately not open to the public, but contracting officers can have access to the data and they can have a better sense of what other agencies are paying for similar goods. So I think that's an interesting way that we're trying to actually leverage the government's spending in a smart way and boost the negotiation power.
Great. Thanks. I think we've got time for a few questions down here in the front.
My name is Rory McDonald. I'm a PhD student at GW, and I'm working with the Open Contracting Partnership. The DATA Act requires a pilot program, and I know that for grants, HHS, the Health and Human Services, is taking the lead and has a project management office set up. I wanted to ask about the procurement-focused element of the pilot. I know there's a national dialogue that's been set up, but the clock is ticking. You don't have forever, so I wanted to ask about your vision for the pilot as it relates to procurement.
Sure, I'll give you a real short answer. Is I had this very conversation with Dave Mader yesterday morning, so you should know. And I think that OMB is looking at what they're going to be rolling out that shortly to give more detail about where they're going to be going on that aspect on the procurement. They're very much aware of the issue of making sure that we're doing something and moving that aspect of the legislation forward.
Any other questions?
Your choice.
Hi, Vicki, I was thrilled with the education scorecard that essentially kind of doesn't give open data about government, but instead it gives open data about colleges, and in particular, data that really the US government's uniquely able to provide by kind of combining which students enrolled in college and from the Department of Education and what are their earnings 10 years later from the IRS. Are there plans for more things like that that will help perhaps consumers and citizens kind of make the private sector more competitive as opposed to kind of make government work better?
Yeah, I think this is basically the mission of 18F, the U.S. Digital Services Team, and these agencies' digital services teams, is how do we unleash the information that we already have and share with the public in more meaningful ways than have been done in the past. The great thing about these teams is that they are human-centered design focused almost ravenously, and so they're really helping prioritize projects based on that citizen focus. And you know, they basically have agencies knocking down their doors for help, but the way that projects are prioritized and decided upon is the ones that are going to be opening up data and that are going to impact the citizen. We could spend all of our time making GSA or other agencies a little bit more interesting, but it really, or efficient or something like that, but it has to focus on the citizen. And that being said, there's only so much that these digital service teams can do across government. I think in total it's not even 200 people right now. And so another thing GSA is helping to do is set up procurement vehicles. That'll be through the GSA Schedules program. It'll be BPAs where we can get these agile companies to come start doing business with government and start developing these as kind of a practice, because we know that our bench strength is only so strong and we have to rely on industry, but we want to make sure that we have the right industry partners when we're doing this work.
And let me add that if you have specific suggestions on data or information that should be unlocked and unleashed, let us know. Yeah. We do have a long list of projects already, but always eager to hear what the people want.
Thanks. We've got time for one last question.
Hi, Tim Lee, FI Consulting. I saw that you know, Dave and Vic in particular touched on the you know, the change necessary in how, you know, how policies develop, how this data is rolled out. But I haven't heard very much about the cultural changes, you know, the software, if you will, of, you know, how to make this work with, you know, within agencies. Is there a strategy being developed for that? Has the thinking, you know, really begun in earnest on that question? Because it's an essential question in my view.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of our time at GSA focusing on this voice of the customer and voice of the employee program. And really what we found at GSA, and as we start to talk to other agencies as they get started, it's almost by default in government that we have this mindset of if we want to tackle a problem, we write a long strategic plan and then we say that there's something wrong with the culture. And I haven't found that to be true in any example so far. I don't think people put on their ties and come to work every morning to not want to serve the citizen. But what we are finding is that there's things in the employee ecosystem that are getting in their way of providing great citizen service. And so our job and across government, really the focus should be on how do we find and diagnose those problem areas, like policies that are backwards and dated and no longer make sense. There was a great Jon Stewart example of the VA services and how the bird flies as a way of determining which medical office you can go by. I mean, that's insane at this day and age. And so it's really kind of identifying what those policies or technologies that might be, or incentives, the wrong metrics that are getting in the way of employees providing great citizen service. So I would encourage agencies not to create another video on customer service and spend more time figuring out what's happening in the ecosystem.
So we've certainly heard about a lot of activity in the executive branch to implement the policy changes that have been introduced over the past couple of years. It's really exciting, and I love the way Dave talked about the disproportional impact of exposing these data sets, new approaches, and lean teams that are having an enormous impact to change our government for the good. And so I just want to thank again our panel, and please join me in wrapping up.